Parents, welcome to another episode of The Journey, a podcast intended to educate, equip, and entertain you as we talk about important issues facing our families. PCA is a Christ-centered, biblically based, and family-focused community of committed believers doing life together. We hope the information you hear on this podcast informs and inspires you to be a better parent. Welcome to The Journey.
All right, parents, welcome back to The Journey. I've got three fantastic guests talking about something super interesting. But before we get to the topic, even though it says it on the little thing, and that's why people click the button, but we're not going to mention it until we get there, why don't we introduce each of you and kind of like what your role is here at PCA. So, Jim, you want to start?
Yeah, I'm Dr. Jen Balogh, and my responsibility here at Prestonwood is to lead the Upper School Learning Lab.
I love that. How long have you been here?
This is my third year back. I was here way back in the day, but third year and my second year in the Learning Lab.
Okay, very good. What, in between? Where did you go?
In between, I spent about 16 years in public education, K through 12. Predominantly a lot of English and reading teaching.
Yes. Favorite
Special
book?
education
Favorite book?
choice. My favorite book, Redeeming Love, Francine Rivers.
Really? Oh. Good book.
I've actually reread it like 3 times, which is something I don't typically do.
Yeah. So. Well, can I just say, resourcing our parents, valuable thing, right? So if our parents are like, Francine Rivers, Redeeming Love.
Yes.
Good book recommendation. Yes. Very good. Jenitta?
I am Jenitta Eskew. I've been at PCA, it's my 13th year.
So straight out of high school.
Yeah. That's what we're going with. I like that.
Wow. Graduated and came on staff.
I like you even more now.
Thank you.
And I transitioned, this is my third year doing Middle School Learning Lab.
Uh-huh.
I transitioned about 3 years ago from core class, 5th grade, into to Learning Lab, and I've loved it. Getting to work with the students in a different way. It's
the
fun.
Middle school ages, right?
You have an age that you love, and that is middle school for me.
But I can tell you, it's so important. And I didn't realize how important it was until really I came here and I watched, right? That lower school, we try to pump as much Bible into them as possible, right? And then the upper school, right, we're wrestling with things, but that middle school is where they're really wrestling with their own identity and trying to understand things. And it's just a super important area. Mm-hmm. So thank you for doing that. Nena.
Hi, Nena Graham. I am the coordinator of curriculum and instruction and specialized learning at Prestonwood.
Does that all fit on a name tag?
I have to space it, one on top of the other.
One on each side, right? Just flip it over on the back side.
So I'm never bored. This is my first year at Prestonwood, 17th year in education, similar to Dr. Balogh, K through 12. So I'm thankful I've seen the full spectrum of kids.
I love that. Well, Jenitta, you get to answer the question. What are we talking about?
We are talking about executive functioning, and actually came to Dan, which was really great that he asked us to do this. I've had a lot of parents asking questions this year about how to help their student, and they're using this buzzword executive functioning.
Right.
And so I really thought it would be beneficial for us to sit down and talk about what actually is executive functioning.
Okay, so I went and looked, and there's 1 million books on it out there. Yeah. So I actually read a couple of them.
Good.
Well, can I tell you, it's really interesting.
Yes, it is.
Seriously, if a parent just wanted to know more about this, it really is a fascinating kind of dive into how the brain works. And how each student is designed differently, and there's different areas of strengths and weaknesses. And I was like, this is really fascinating. So I appreciate what you guys do even more. So executive functioning, give us a little summary of what are we talking about?
There's lots of parts. So there's 3 main parts, but we really kind of go into 6 parts. I'm going to look at my notes right here, but it's organization, working memory, goal setting, planning and time management, self-regulation, and accountability. And really what those are, what we want parents to understand is it's not tied to an IQ.
Okay.
It is a totally different way your brain processes information, what you do. And really what we want them to know is it starts, which Dina's going to touch more on, it starts when they're a baby. You start these skills at a younger age.
Yeah.
And so we just want parents to understand kind of what that looks like and what it could look like in their home for them to help better equip their students to be successful.
Yeah, and maybe give some tips on how we can improve those things, right? And what to look for at certain ages, that if your son or daughter hasn't developed maybe these things by this age, it might be something you want to look into, right? So, Nena, you're starting with lower school?
Yes.
What does this look like as I'm talking to my kindergartner, right? And are they supposed to be able to right? Get up at a certain time, get themselves dressed, right? Get themselves to school on time, right? That's what we're hoping for by the time that they finish with kindergarten?
I don't know about kinder, but we are going to share resources from the Harvard Center on the Developing Child.
Okay.
And it starts as a baby. And so
Sure.
one thing for me as a mother of lower school children is it was a relief to read some of the suggestions, because patty cake, peekaboo, reading the same book over and over again have research-based, like, tied to stronger executive function and stronger working memory. And so for some of our parents, reviewing this will be a relief that what you're doing at home already is that building block. When we get to the kindergarten level, and even before, what we really want to focus on is self-led play, independent play. We want, as parents, to protect and shield our children, and sometimes that desire hinders them and hinders their ability. So there is research in independent play and children playing with each other without an adult hovering nearby. It builds a higher locus of control in children. Yeah. And so they feel more autonomy in their life. And research shows that higher locus of control, lower anxiety.
Oh, so I get exactly what you're saying is when I give my son or daughter the iPad and I let them just play with it for 4 or 5 hours, I've given them that locus of control. Is that what we're talking about?
I think in that situation, and, there is no judgment around screens. It is a tool, and as a parent, sometimes we need that hour to get our life together. But in that, when they're on those screens, they're not having to necessarily navigate the way that they would in play.
Okay, so say it again.
Yes.
And this time you can say we're not judging.
Yes.
But you're going with research and saying, right, that's not the most helpful for the brain development of your son or daughter.
Not at all.
Okay.
And again, we had a lot of screen time over Thanksgiving break, so no judgment. But so the more that they can do that at a young age, and so, when we were researching, getting ready for this podcast, I spoke to a, childhood expert on self-led play for children, and she said one way that she teaches parents who aren't used to that model, because so much of our model now is just being so involved with our kids and the play groups and the, someone fell down and we rush over, is giving our young children sentence stems. So if I'm having a conflict and I come to an adult, as an adult, I can give that child a sentence stem to say, why don't you ask them this? Or why don't you tell them, I don't like it when you do this. I don't want to play with you if we will do this. Give them those sentence stems, but they have ownership to go back to their peer and have that conversation, as opposed to us coming in and saving the day for them. As far as our younger, children, activities that they talked about, which are very helpful, are games like Old Maid, Go Fish, I Doubt It. They said call and response. Games are really great because you're storing that information in your memory and then knowing when to say it back. I Spy books even, so sometimes those get a bad rap. I started my career in elementary school libraries, and we used to kind of judge the I Spy books, and now I feel bad. But they said for that, they require categorization and sustained attention. So for some of our kids who love those books, you are building their executive functioning skills with that. Middle school, Sudoku, brain teasers, even some screen time games. Lumosity is one that was recommended by the Center on the Developing Child, because those games are building skills. So that could be a good one. And then upper school, and even in our lower grades, soccer, sports, music, these are all things that are giving them autonomy. They're having to have self-control. They're having to plan 3 steps ahead and then know how to perform. So all of those things, if you're doing that, you're in a good spot, and give yourself a pat on the back because
I
you
love
are
it.
growing them.
Yeah, we'll talk about red flags later, but let's go on to middle school and just kind of see what that development looks like as we keep going.
You knew I had one in my head.
So, middle school, 5th grade is usually, it's sometimes, it's harder for students to acclimate because they're used to the homeroom, and
Right.
5th grade has a lot of moving parts.
And can I just, it's part of the process, though.
Yes.
It's very interesting because some parents feel like their son or daughter, they're really struggling with the changing environment, and that's a good. It's when they come home, and it's like, not everything's established for me. It's like, right. So the struggle is natural.
Correct.
Yes.
Right? That middle school struggle of having to identify different things and a change, right, is great because when they get to high school and they really are responsible on their own, it's because they've been developed. So if parents step in those middle school years, and that the helicopter parent becomes the lawnmower parent, and you really begin to take away those obstacles, right? It may be a better 5th grade year, but it's a much worse 9th grade year and 10th grade year. And so, right, so 5th grade, a little bit of adjustment there.
It is, and trying to meet them where they're at, like 5th grade, like some of the things I always tell my parents is like easy things that you're probably doing, but have a charging station. Have a place where your iPads go every night. You see them there, they're ready to go. Pack your backpack the night before, things that they're hopefully doing in elementary, but they're taking those skills. We have more projects, like I said, with moving things going in 5 different classes, so teaching them to plan ahead, adding my PCA, we really push, but I love my PCA. It's just a great tool that parents can use, but we're really teaching your student how to use that and utilize that as one of the many hopefully parts that they have. But that way it helps them feel successful, and then they're not starting their day stressed.
Yes.
So having all those things are great. And then just helping them be prepared. Like I said, we add tasks, trying to chunk out things, assignments and stuff, and trying to organize, like, what does their day look like? Having them look like that and take ownership of that for themselves is just a huge part. The biggest goal that I feel in middle school, and hopefully it's every year, is that as a parent, no matter what you're doing, which will look different, I have 2 boys, and what I did looks very different for each of them because we're all at a different place. Our executive functionings are, having at a different speed, but that your goal for each of them is to do a little less every year. So you're building those things. So that should just be a goal across all of us, is that as a parent, you're equipping them to be that successful person. So.
All right. So as we get into high school, what are things we're looking for?
So same type of transition when you come into 9th grade. That's a big change, and the stakes are raised, right? So now we're changing classes. We have multiple, but now our grades matter. They do count.
Say
the
it again.
Grades matter.
Grades matter. Right? And matter meaning, and I'll say this, right, because it's one of the things that our parents kind of struggle with. Matter in terms of not the identity of your child, but hopefully a reflection of what they're learning and the amount of work that they're putting in. Because some people, it's like, well, my son got a B, right? So that means that he's less than.
Correct.
And it's like, well, no, it just means that your son didn't work as hard as, or it means that might not be the area that your son's going to go into.
Right.
So I'm glad I got some B's and some other
Yes.
kids got some A's because, right?
Yes.
I go, that's their area of strength, but here's mine. And so I
Right.
think parents need to realize that.
Absolutely, and there's a few nuggets there you said because they do matter because they're calculated
Right,
and
right.
they and my juniors are all they're really coming to terms with this is important. I need to dig in a little bit more here.
Sure.
There's more at stake.
Sure.
But it is really something for a parent to understand. Yes, it's not an identity. You explained it perfectly, and that's really important. It's also not the parent's grade.
What?
So that
Living vicariously
self-identity, if
through-
your
yes,
child,
it's
if they're
not.
not doing all those things
That's
you
right.
just said, then their grade will not reflect maybe
Yeah.
what the desired outcome is. But that's not a reflection of me as a mom if my son doesn't do the things that he needed to do to earn that grade.
Right. Or he might be wired differently.
It might be wired
right?
differently.
Just
and
because
that's-
you were great in math doesn't mean your daughter or son is going to be great in math.
Exactly. And so I think sometimes we can put an expectation on our child that's
Sure.
unrealistic.
Yeah.
I do think that we need to start coaching them even at that 9th grade level. And I think at the high school level, it's a coaching. Especially if you've done a really good job as they age and get older, you need to come alongside them at this age. I think you said middle schoolers with identity, high schoolers are still coming into their own, right? And ways to be positively encouraging them is more, if I take my PCA, for example, my students who really master my PCA, know how to make it work for them, are the less stressed because they have that control of, I know what's coming.
Yeah.
When mom or dad is taking control of my PCA, then the student doesn't have that control, and they're not really sure. But the kids who can come in to me and say, I know I got this and I got to, how can you help me figure out this? We go through that goal setting for the week or the semester. And so it's maybe, as a mom, I look at a freshman's my PCA on Sunday. And we pull it open and we look at the week and we kind of forecast, because even at that age, I'm still driving my child where they need to go for most things. And so there is a part that I'm involved in, but I can't take over.
Right.
And so we need to plan together. How are you going to accomplish that if you have that test? Where are we going to study because we have football or baseball or dance or whatever it might be? I think those are important pieces to help your child figure out. And by just having those conversations. And the more I see that with students, they come into me and they're already prepared. They just need me to be a sounding board and kind of offer a suggestion or two. The children who are someone else is managing my PCA, they're disengaged, kind of like you said. They're not putting the effort in because they're like, oh, someone else is going to handle that for me. I don't have to worry right now until the last minute, And so just in giving them the autonomy and empowering them with positive feedback, but also just real open conversations about what they need to accomplish in the week and ways that you can assist them in getting there.
Yeah, very helpful. I like that. Let's talk about red flags. Through the development, right, as I'm looking at my son and daughter, executive functioning, the ability, and you listed off the great things, but I'm just telling you, there are some students, right, that you're just like, time management, right? I mean, we're talking to adults here, and it's like they're terrible at time management. So where do we start looking for some things where we go, I think my son or daughter is really struggling in this area, or where is it, something where we go, this is something I really need to have them look into, right? Not just help them with it, guide them with it, but maybe there's an extra step that I need to go get, right? What do those red flags look like at each kind of stage of development?
So I think in one thing that for our parents to understand is that our children's brains are still growing to 25 or 29. The Cleveland Clinic says, cites experts who say you develop your executive function until 29. So there's hope. There is hope for us. So the first and foremost, remembering with our teenagers, with our middle schoolers, it is expected developmentally that they need a support system in this. And so if you feel like my middle schooler needs so much hand-holding, I don't know that that's a red flag as long as they're getting the hand-holding, as long as you're able to back off, meet them where they are and back off. For lower school children, the one area of executive functioning that if it is not developing appropriately becomes an issue is self-control. So those peer interactions, the ability to focus on the teacher when the air conditioner is making a weird sound, that is the one where we really see the spike, because it's so natural for them. The other aspects of executive functioning are kind of done at the classroom level as a whole group. So self-control, the ability to filter things out, the ability to focus, and those peer relationships for lower school is the biggest area where if you see a red flag, we have a wonderful counselor at the lower school, just have that conversation. And, have the sidebar conversations like with your child about some of that self-control and the peer relationships. But if you see it's an issue, our counselor is definitely a great first step.
Yeah.
And then just, when they're at your home, talking them through those things. Like, how did you feel? I mean, those are conversations, but these are parent things too. And this is what hopefully the parent is helping if they see that that's a struggle.
Right.
In lower school. In middle school, it's, biggest thing we try to push is self-advocacy.
Sure.
That we really want them to do. But we see that for middle school, it's mostly the time management because being an emotional that you don't want to stand out at all in middle school. So that kind of stops somewhat.
Yeah.
But the component we mostly see is just the time management, being organized. And so I would say that's when there are executive functioning coaches. It's parent. One of my sons struggled, and I always joke that he was my part-time job, but that was fine. You know, we got through school together, but just kind of knowing what that looks like, and asking teachers, like, what can I do to help? What do you see in the classroom? What can I do at home? We would love to partner with anybody that has questions to help them see what that could look like for them to help their child. So.
One of the things that, as we were talking before, is that culturally things are different. I'm going to be 50 tomorrow.
Ooh.
Big one, right?
Birthday.
But you think back how we came up as kids. If I had rec practice, I got myself there. You rode your bike to Little League. You did all of these things on your own.
Mm-hmm.
You were in charge of your homework. Your mom and dad weren't asking you about it.
That's right.
And so right now, the way we're designed in our communities and neighborhoods, you're taking your kid. So yes, sports is wonderful, but you're also driving them, and you're in control of that time piece.
And
so
a coach has set up practice, and they go from station to station and things like that.
And so how do you instill then? So I'm thinking about shoes. Maybe your kid always forgets their cleats, things like that. So maybe for you, the conversation is, yes, you have to drive them. You have to be a part of it.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe it's, tomorrow we're going to have to leave at 5. What are the things you need in your bag to make sure that you're ready? Because once we leave the house and get there, you're going to have to practice in whatever it is you have, right? Just that's a practical thing, but it is parents understanding that they have to naturally be part of some of these things that when we were coming up, our parents weren't as involved in and so we had to problem solve and figure it out on our own. And if I was late to practice, the coach and I my mother had nothing to do with that. Yep. That relationship was only between the coach and myself, right? And so a lot of times now that's just a gray area, but it impacts our students when we see well, that's just a natural component to the way things are right now. So maybe as a mom and dad think, okay, where can I back off? Mm-hmm. Where can I impart this ability to problem solve and figure it out without taking over because I got to get us there. Because it is me also as the driver. I felt like that as a parent, I can't be late to that practice, right? And it's not even me, but because I'm the driver, I do have some control. But sometimes the tardiness is because my kid didn't have their things prepared in their bag to go, right? My son's a senior, and yesterday was like, I forgot my pants. But I made him breakfast, and then he got distracted, and he laid the pants down. He came for basketball, and I was like, you're just going to have to find something when you get there, right? Ask a friend, figure it out. And so he came in a couple hours later in these giant, huge, pants. And I was like, those are cute,
Figured it out.
And he figured it out. He's like, I don't want to, I don't want to get written up. I just took whatever she gave me and I put them on.
Yeah.
So those are things, though, right, that instead of, no, don't drive home, how do we fix it in the moment? And they do need to be led there.
Yeah.
So
it's a lot of coaching. It's a lot of coaching, and I think that some parents feel like when their child's not organized or they're not some of these, then they come to Learning Lab thinking, oh, I need a diagnosis, like maybe it's something else. And that's what we want parents to understand. It's not related to their IQ. It's not related to anything, a learning difference. Mm-hmm. That these could be things that they could just do things, maybe small changes in their house, maybe some small changes in what they're doing with their children in preparation, or even giving them multiple steps and not the rescue. Like I know at my house, my kids got one rescue a year. You better make it good because I'm only going home to help you one time. But they knew that. But I mean,
one rescue.
One rescue.
So,
but just kind of building those things and letting them in middle school. I feel like I'm not saying grades do matter. Please hear me, they matter. But being able to fail and get that C, but then seeing and getting the grit that they know that they need to be more successful in high school when the grades matter for college. I mean, but letting your child fail is an important part of the learning process. And so we want, just
absolutely,
to
even in a grade, because I've had a couple conversations since being here at the high school where I've said maybe this is a good time for them not to pass this or to fail that, because think about it. Let's think if they're not in your home and they're off to school, and not only the financial ramifications of that, but then they're not under your roof. You aren't there to pick up the pieces.
Right.
That professor's not going to talk to you.
Nope.
And so maybe they need to feel how uncomfortable it's going to be and the consequence of those choices.
You learn there.
Right?
You might want to learn.
This may feel really uncomfortable, but trust me, learning as a parent, all the beating of my own head against the wall is not going to change that scenario, right? And so let's let them fail when we're here to insulate, love on them, protect them,
Sure.
and then like help them figure out how to make it right.
Yeah.
Instead of they're 19, 20, 21, 30, whatever it might be, right? And we haven't imparted those skills for them and made them feel safe enough that it's okay if you messed up, Dan. Like, I'm here to help you figure out how to get out of that hole and like move you forward so that you're not in that situation again.
Yeah.
You know?
Now, so I have 4 kids, all very different, and all very different in these particular areas. When I was younger, I had a couple teachers who kind of came alongside me, and when the air conditioning, went off, I got distracted. But they're right, yeah. But their concept was like, listen, you're doing really well in class. I would probably self-diagnose myself as ADD, right? He's just like, learn how your brain works, and use how your brain works to the best of its ability. So I just remember one time when the experiment that they do where they take all the rocks and they try to put them in, and, and you start with the big rock first, and then you go to the small rocks and things like that.
Right.
And it was very interesting because somebody described, it's like, listen, if you're ADD, you don't do the big rocks first, right? Because the little rocks are distracting to you. And so literally my best working environment is if I have any little distractions or any little projects to do, I do those first. And when I get to the big project, when I get to the big thing, I have to save that when I don't have any distractions.
Right.
And so it's kind of interesting. Like, I can't work like everybody else apparently works,
right,
because that's not how my brain works.
Right.
And so I look at that and I kind of go, how do we pay attention, not just to these particular things, but really kind of like, okay, how are my son and daughter's brain developing and functioning? And what if they are a little bit different, right? What if, they see things a little bit differently? How do I appreciate that, not try to fit them into the mold of this is how everybody, if you're not at this particular point by 3rd grade, you're really in trouble. And sometimes we think that as a parent, right? Like all the other kids got dressed today, but my kid can't get up and get out of bed. It's like, okay, is that just because your kid is this, or is it like, well, we need to get him in and get him diagnosed, right? I think that's part of the question as well. Right, where do ADD and now ADHD, where do those fit into the executive functioning role and concept as well?
So there is a lot of research around ADHD, autism, what they would call neurodivergence and executive functioning. And first of all, I just would like to say thank God that God made us so differently with different skills, and we need those minds are building the future of our world right now. So thank God for people.
Well, I think about people who like hyper focus on something.
Yes.
Right.
Right.
And it's interesting because it's like, oh no, you can't hyper. Okay, here's some people out there hyper focusing on something, and they're coming up with cures for things, right? Because their mind won't leave something alone.
Right.
And I'm just like, great. Put them in this particular job where that's what they hyper-focus on all the time. Other people who can balance things, and when the air conditioning goes on, they can just stay focused. I'm like, awesome. But when the air conditioning goes off, and it's like, good, put them in the air conditioning business. They can listen to things. And, I'm just like, that's an interesting aspect of God has designed us differently. So how concerned should I be about these things? And
I think the good news is, if you have a child who is, who does have ADHD, is on the autism spectrum, anything like that, where these may be a challenge for you, it is not a fixed skill set. It is, if I can say just one more time, this is not a fixed skill set. Even as adults, like I am working on my executive functioning as an adult.
Yes.
I am fully working on that.
Yeah. There's some areas I've given up on for me, but
Yeah.
I should probably be working on some of them.
But, but it is not fixed. And so having compassion for where your child is, meeting your child where they are, and developing a plan to
get better in some areas, right?
And
Right.
to your point, there are coaches that work on executive functioning with children. So if you feel like this is, and I think also as a parent, as an educator, I am fully capable on paper of educating my children. I could be a homeschool mom on paper. It's not going to happen for me and my family, because of the family dynamics and, who my children are and what they need. And so if some parents just need also that coach to walk alongside them and say, here are some suggestions and here are some things. And how many of us have had kids or students who hear something from someone else that you've said 75 times?
Totally.
And you're like,
and it finally connects.
oh,
and you
Mr.
go,
Rogers told you that. Thank you. Great. That's so amazing. You heard it. But so just for our parents to know, it's not fixed. It can be developed. And we all have our own skills that, like, I'm always going to be a 5 here.
And some of us as parents, we have that same weakness that we see in our child, and we're trying to fix, right?
Yeah.
They got it from us.
You wonder where it came from.
I think that also raises the anxiety of like, oh, we can feel the struggle in it. One of my sons has that. He will hyper-focus on a sound, right? And he'll come home and say, did you know this? And I'm like, oh, I've noticed that before,
But I moved on.
And so I think it's important that, like you said, they're all very different. I have 2 neurodivergent children and with ADHD, and they're incredibly different in the way that they think and the way they express themselves and the type of student that they are, even though they have a similar thing that is a struggle. Most of our students with any type of, whether it's ADHD or a specific learning disability, all have a working memory weakness of some type. It's a struggle, and they have to work at that, and they have to use different strategies to improve in particular areas just so that they can memorize something or what have you. And so those are just, I call them life skills, honestly. That's just what they are. This is how we succeed. And so many of our students who maybe they do have something that's not their strength, they have so many other gifts that God has, entrusted them with that, like, really at the end of the day when they get out of school, who cares?
Focus on your strengths.
They're going to focus on those things. And
we're not going to get a job in my weakness.
Correct.
Right? Here's the one thing I don't do well. Right? How do I get a job in that? You don't. You go on to the things where you're going to do well.
Exactly.
In.
And so I think we too, like I thought of first grade, the turkey or something my son had to make, and it looked like a first grader made it, but everyone else's on the wall looked like mom or dad made it, right? And I think
well, and kind of just that depends on which number child it is.
Yeah,
because
right?
in our family, that's the joke, right? Preston's turkey was actually made by his parents, right? Parker's turkey had a little bit of help from his parents. Sophie's turkey, we knew she was doing the project, and Campbell came home and showed us his turkey, and we're like, I didn't even know you had that,
exactly,
right?
Exactly.
Right? And so that plays
that
into
definitely plays
right,
into
not
it.
just their development, but a development of us as a parent.
Absolutely. Because I know through the years, and my children are 17 and 20, and so I have learned more through my career. Like you said, as an educator, you learn more. Also through my work with kids, through this process, you're kind of like, you learn more, and I'm like, ooh, don't say that, or don't do that, or maybe I need to back off a little here.
Right.
Maybe I need to, roll back what I want in this situation and let him figure it out. And I will tell you that with those two, every day there's something where I'm like, ooh, there's a win, there's a success where it's like, hey, Mom, I've got to take care of this, and I need to do this and this and this. When can I have time with you for help on this? And I'm out of it, and those skills are there. With the 20-year-old, you're like, okay, it all worked out, but there were many days and tears where I wasn't sure it was going to, and so that's the encouragement is when you walk through this with them and it feels like it's all falling apart or you can't help them in these areas, you really can, and that, God's faithful to you, but also to them and the work that they're putting into it. And you see that fruit as the older they get. And I see that with student after student every day, and how much the kids have grown 1 year over the next, or the freshmen I had now as juniors, and the things that they're able to think through with me or ahead of time. I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
And I was going to say, the biggest thing I think for parents too is not to play the compare game, which I think is really hard.
So
in our
hard.
society,
That was my
in our
point with the
world.
turkey.
Yeah. So hard.
Because they're all, every student or your child is growing at a different speed, so you can't expect every 5-year-old to look the same. They shouldn't look the same.
Comparison is the thief of joy.
Yes,
I know.
So if you feel that if they're falling behind somewhere, then just work with that. And I think spending that time with them, like I know my son who's a senior, was ADHD and had other things, but just to know them and know what works with them, what works well for them. Even when he was a senior in high school and he had to memorize something because it just was really hard for him, we would go in my room as a senior, and we would do it to a song, and I'm doing hand motion. I mean, so just getting to know your child, spending time with them and figuring those things out. And that's pretty much, I mean, elementary, middle school, that's what we're really trying to do, is what works well for you, what's going to help you as a learner, what's going to help you function in life. Yeah. And as a parent, spending that time to know them. And so, putting that time in, and then just the benefit of seeing that.
It is an investment of time. I tease and we joke about, I tell parents, I've sat in your shoes. Last night I was at the dining room table for 90 minutes, working on this or that. But that support is the key piece.
Invaluable.
Because when you're able to then step back a bit, you see that they're able to do it and that they don't need you each stage, less and less and less, and that's what you want. But it is an investment of yourself, for sure, to help guide them along.
So big summaries on executive functioning, right? Pay attention to your children. Yes. Try to back off. A little bit of growth, right? So if you notice that they're struggling in some areas, it's not that we've mastered it by third grade, or we've even mastered it by the time that they graduate. But what are the areas that they can grow in, and how do we help them put a plan together to grow in those areas, right? So anything else, just a little nugget?
I have two things I would like to say at the end. So especially for our parents of high schoolers, just have compassion for your children. The American Psychological Academy did a 2014 study. Teens in school are the highest, most stressed subpopulation in America. More stressed than we are, more stressed than in medical school, more stressed than brain surgeons. That is the highest stress population. So we have to have compassion for what they're going through socially at school and academically.
And can I just tell you, stress and anxiety does not help you with rational, reasonable thought.
Absolutely.
So that's the biggest thing. And specifically, one of my children would always talk about how they're stressed before they go take an exam. And I'm like, well, here's the thing. All the work that you just put in to prepare for the exam, you've now just turned your brain off, and now you're walking into the exam.
Right.
I said that doesn't help us, right? So either don't do any work and just walk in there, or if you're going to do the work, walk in there with confidence that, you're going to get the grade that you're going to get, right? And you don't need to stress about it, because your brain literally just turns off when you have all that anxiety. And so our kids are working hard, right? We need to help them just relax. Here's the process. We've all gone through it, and look at us. We survived. And they will survive. And so for us not to compare them and not to place that pressure and that stress and that anxiety versus somebody else, or versus your brother or sister, or versus you as a child, and allow them to say, this is how God's designed them. Let's help them be the best version that they can be of themselves, right? But let's also try to remove as much of that stress and anxiety as possible. And you had one more?
Second point is something that I utilized as a classroom teacher is when I realized a system was no longer working in my class, or never worked in my class. Also, that happened. I would have an honest conversation with my students and say, this system that I developed, so I would own that, is not working for our classroom anymore. And here are the changes that I'm going to make, and here's the reason why. And so if you are a parent hearing this and thinking, wow, I am over helping, over protecting, doing the most, going home and fixing the problems, please have that conversation with your child before you make the changes, so that they can process and own it as an adult. I did this, and the more I think about it, I'm not comfortable with that. I want you to be independent. So here's what we're doing as a family, so it isn't a shift for them that they weren't expecting or didn't know about.
Just turn it off and, Yes. Yeah, that's very valuable.
I was just going to say that, the roads of life is bumpy. Yeah. And so their executive functioning may have been great in 4th and 5th, and then something happens. And that's part of it, because there could be, and for a parent, you should know your child, know when you may have to step in. You may have been hands off in 5th, and then something's going on in 6th, and it's okay to step in for a little bit and then step back out. And I think my biggest takeaway is that be the cheerleader on their sideline. I think that they need that more than the parent telling them what to do. That's probably my biggest thing, is that just be the person that's cheering them on. And I know that they're doing that, but just as a reminder, just that should be their main role. So
because as educators, we get to see the other side of the coin. And so that's a huge thing to express to parents of how important that positivity is, so that when they come to us, we can hear, they'll kind of let down, right? And they'll tell you their frustrations. And so they already have all of that working against them. And so the more positive and the more you can come alongside them, the better off your relationship will be too with your child, which is key.
Yeah.
And this is like their life right now is this little part of a long road. So we're going to focus on that's just this little part. So we're getting them ready for
destination's way
was that an age shot? Turning 50, the long
already 50.
long
cross
road.
that finish line.
We're getting shorter, but yeah.
Well, you guys are super helpful. I'm so glad that you're here and getting to work with our students and working with our parents and really kind of bringing this to attention, because I know it's a buzzword. It's out there. A lot of parents are, executive functioning, and I have to have, my son or daughter has to be at this level by this time. And it's like, slow down.
Right.
Do some research, ask some questions, but then put a plan together, right? And talk to your son and daughter and say, hey, here's an area I think we can strengthen. Here's an area that you're so good at, right? The cheerleader part, but here's an area that you might need some help in, and let's put a plan together. But the worst thing you can do, right, is bulldoze those problems out of the way, right? And they'll never learn the skills that they need to go on in life. So anyway, you guys are awesome. Thanks for your time, and thanks for sharing with our parents.
Thank you.
Thank you for investing the time to listen to this episode of The Journey. Please take a minute to share with friends and family who will also benefit from this valuable resource. And don't forget to rate and review this podcast on your favorite podcast app. It is truly our blessing and honor to walk with you on The Journey.